Hey guys, today I'm going to try and compare, even if it's not really a comparison, just give you some thoughts on two different types of pumps that are very similar to each other. First one is the Shuflo 8000 series. Let's see if you can see that. 1.5 gallon per minute, 5.7 amps, or excuse me, 5.7 liters per minute, 12 amps, 12 volt DC, 150 psi. And I've made a few videos about this particular pump. It's dead now. The motor shaft is broken off, as we saw in one of the other videos. It gave me about 1,500 hours before its first problem, and then lived about another 1,000 hours after that with different repairs and whatnot to keep it going. This pump is made in Mexico with Chinese parts. This pump is a Singflo, very similar design. See if I can get you in here to see this. It's 1.5 gallon per minute also, 5.5 liter, 10.5 amp. $12 volt and 160 psi. I don't know if that'll focus on that for you. Try to set this camera up where we can see what's going on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start with the Shuflo, I guess. I've already got this pretty much disassembled, so we can get through this pretty quick. This wire here is just coming into the pressure shutoff sensor here, which is non-operable, but that's what that is. Okay, these work by using a diaphragm. That's what this is, and as it rotates, the motor rotates around. You can see this going up and down. It has three little positions, or three little valves, and they go up and down, and they bring water in, push water out. Sometimes these get dirty and you have to clean them out and whatnot, but basically these are little rubber. You see that? Rubber that sits on top of the assembly. This piece comes as one unit. This connects to the motor shaft, and as that spins around, this lobe, if you can see that, has a 3-degree tilt to it, and that's what causes this to move up, and this part to move up and down. So that's how it works. And that's connected to the other part of the housing, which is then connected to the chassis and held on by these two bolts that go all the way through and connect into these holes. So that's how both of these pumps work the same way. This one has rubber feet on a base plate, which is welded to the bottom of the frame itself, or the chassis itself. I've never had any issues with these. I usually mount them vertically to a piece of wood with the diaphragm part at the bottom, so that if any leaks or whatnot, it doesn't get my motor wet. Although this pump itself has actually been submerged about 3/4 of the way up in water, and was still operating when I found it that way. Part of its demise, I guess. Not really meant to have water inside your motor. I did try to get it dried out as best I could, but I think that caused me some problems. Moving over to the Singflo. Pull this in here so we can see what's going on. This guy, he lasted about 500 hours before the bearings seized up on it. Now, cost-wise, it's 1/3 of the cost of the Shuflo. And it gave about one third of the time. We bought it for a backup while we were waiting to get parts for the Shuflo so that we could keep going. We realized at the time, it was a cheaper model, so chances are there were going to be some compromises. Didn't have a lot of great expectations, although I didn't expect it to go down that fast. Anyway, so a couple of things going on here. One, instead of having the base plate like the other one had, this one has little rubber feet. And, see, not this one, no, this one's still good. See if you can see that they tear. So that happened pretty early on. So I ended up tying it with wire to a piece of a flip-flop to minimize the vibration, and that worked. So we're going to cut that loose. See what we got going on. So you can see on the bottom these little rubber guys here, they slide in, and then you screw that down. So that's how that's mounted, but it doesn't really hold up. It would probably be okay if it was mounted flat, but that's not what I did with it. So, yeah, being mounted vertically, pull that off. Being mounted vertically, you could see that it had no chance anyway. So maybe that's user error. So I've got this one for the most part loosened up. Let's see what we got going on in here. I really think both of these pumps would do okay if they were in a little bit lighter workload. Out here it's pretty heavy. I'm asking it to work at its maximum for 3 or 4 hours a day in some pretty intense heat. So, yeah, I mean, if they were just moving, some chemicals around, or even at a car wash or whatnot, which I think is primarily what they're designed for, to where they're on, off, for little bits and pieces here and there, and usually in a more protected environment, I think they would do okay. So I'm not beating up on either one of them, really. So one thing to kind of compare here is the back of this Singflo is plastic. Seems to be a pretty good seal, if you guys can see that okay. Seems to be a pretty good seal. Not sure I really like this whole feet mechanism built into my back plate, but here's what it is. This probably actually provides a better watertight seal than what is on the Shuflo, which is a piece of metal and then it's screwed down. Neither one of these are designed to be waterproof, and I can tell you for a fact the Shuflo is not, because it was submerged. But you should not submerge your water pumps if they're not submersible. So let's take this apart. see what we got in here. One of the issues that I had right to begin with in trying to service this pump is that, if you can see this here, the pressure shutoff switch is in the front, 2 wires. So the wire, these two are actually connected. And you can see even there, they're so tight. See that? That's connected from the factory, and then this other lead here is your point of connecting your power. So you would connect your power to the black that's in the back. You can see that, the black that's in the back, and then the red. That's where you connect your power, and then this wire runs from the pressure shutoff switch to the back. You cannot service this, you cannot open this without removing this wire. They didn't leave enough slack in it to get it out. So cut that off. Okay, here you can see the brush assembly. It's made into the back plate. This would be the heat sensor right here, this little piece. Not heat sensor, and then the overheat shut off. When it gets too hot, it'll cut it off. Brushes are still good. There's a lot of life left in these brushes. So that wasn't my first part of fail. The bearings actually seized up. This design has its advantages over the Shuflo, in my opinion. I think. I'm not sure. Haven't had a chance to service this one a whole lot. The Shuflo, on the other hand, of course, the back would come off. Hopefully you guys can see all this. I would make excuses for my videos, but I'm not going to. So you take that back off, and then this brush housing here is a separate piece. And this one has been in a few videos before where it has been repaired. I don't know if you guys can see all the Durapoxy holding this thing together. Durapoxy is a 2-part epoxy. A bunch of places on the outside where just over time and heat this assembly came apart, broke in several places. So I got it put back together, and it continued to work. Probably still will. So that's the differences there in how they're put together in the back. You've got the one piece back and assembly there, and then the brush assembly for this. Another difference to note really is, and this is one of the issues I had here, get it in the frame for you. This piece actually melted, the piece of plastic, so I rebuilt it with Durapoxy. And that's where the channel for the brush slides in that channel. So you can see that. So the channels for these brushes are plastic with just a simple, spring in the channel itself. You see that. Whereas these guys, they have their own little metal channel, probably resist the heat a little better. Also probably a little easier to work with as far as brush replacement. I don't think so anyway. Alright, moving on. From there, and it doesn't really matter, really just depends on what you're trying to work on if you're servicing these, which bolts you would remove. If you were just working on the diaphragm, there'd be no need to take apart the back. There'd be no need for that. You could work up here. However, if you're trying to get to the whole diaphragm assembly, you would have to at least loosen those two bolts that were in the back. And then that would allow this to come out. We've got one screw left. Design-wise, they're very, very similar. These are the only two DC water pumps I have experience with, so they all might be similar, but based on the pictures I've seen, these two guys are almost direct copies of each other. And you can see it's under the same kind of assembly. The Shuflo, very similar, and what's going on there. Again, the feet part is made into the diaphragm housing where these little feet go. I'm not sure if I like that, especially if the feet aren't going to last. But anyway, probably the biggest issue that I have with this particular pump is that there's very little information on the internet about it. Very little information from its own company. Very little information in a manual. Parts are difficult, if not impossible. Again, one of the reasons why we bought this pump is because we had parts on order from the other one which were difficult to get but not impossible. Whereas the parts for the Singflo, I haven't been able to find any yet. And I'm in need of some because I don't think this pump is dead. But definitely got to do some more investigation with it. This piece feels really fragile compared to this one. You can see some thickness difference. And of course it could be too that the bearings and whatnot are in here, so it feels a little bit heavier. But even still, you can see a difference in thickness in the side walls. It just feels really light. So moving on. Inside the chassis, you have your two magnets, which is how your motor works. You got magnets on the chassis wall, and then the magnets on the motor spin around. These seem to be quite similar in construction and thickness. They might even be, no, they're not interchangeable, if you can see that. One's a little bit shorter than the other. But comparable. They're very similar. Here are the two motors. Shuflo on the right with my broken shaft here. They're not exactly the same motor, but wow, they're close. You can see this one's got considerably more wear on this part than this, just because of the amount of hours it's been in service. And how many times I've taken that out and cleaned it and sanded it smooth again. I've had this bearing on this one fail a few times and replaced it. This one on the Singflo seems to be still good. Now normally this part would come off of this motor, but I'm not sure what's really happening here. Okay, there we go. That came off. That's good news. Even the cam on that is quite similar. I'll show you. So let's suppose that that does rest in there permanently. All right, we'll assume that that's how that's supposed to be. And probably, yeah, these tangs, these little tangs right here, that's what's holding it in on the Shuflo. That's what's holding that assembly down. This looks, yeah, almost identical, but they're not holding that down. Not holding it in. And I don't know if that's because of, honestly not sure what's happening there, but see if you can see that. Yeah, that's where that's seized up. The cam here, very similar. I'm not sure of the degree angle on it. You would almost think that these parts are interchangeable, but it would be interesting to see. Very, very similar. Anyway, so back to the motor. You would think that would come off, that wouldn't be just stuck to the motor like that. And again, due to heat and whatnot, I don't know. I'm not going to rest it off in this particular video, but kind of get the idea. Curious to see. I'll test it and see if the Shuflo, man, look at that. It's not exact. There's some gaps here and there, but man, that is very, very, almost looks like the bottom piece is warped a little bit compared to the top. So I can get that back on there. It does. It's not a good mate, but wow, really close. But that's how close these pumps really are. I'm not sure motor-wise if I could call out one being better or different than the other. Looks like the wire and the Shuflo's on the right. Singflo is on the left. The wire looks to be a little bit thicker. They probably both buy their motors from somewhere else anyway. But anyway, very similar. So that's kind of my exposition, if you will, for these two pumps. I still think I can get this Singflo running again eventually if I can figure out either how to get parts or how to fabricate something. We've been using bicycle bearings for the Shuflo when we replace it. I haven't actually gotten factory replacement parts for the Shuflo. Not for the bearings. The diaphragm assemblies, these guys right here, I buy, and I've left a link in my last video because we were talking about how to repair those when they go bad. So this one's another challenge, and again, looks like there's some issue here because that shouldn't just pull right out of there. Anyway, if any of you guys have some more information of Singflo or know where we can get some more information, that would be nice. Otherwise, I hope it's been informative in some way. I've learned a few things. But until next time, we'll play with pumps again in the future, I'm sure.